Welcome back to the FTN NFL Team Preview Series. We're taking a look at the Ravens today. I'm your host, Mike Randall. Follow me on X at Randall Rant. And as always, we are sponsored by Boom Fantasy, your top choice for daily fantasy sports action. Boom Fantasy, innovative games for the casual and the hardcore fan. Win up to 500 times your entry only at Boom Fantasy. Download it, App Store, Google Play, wherever. But use that promo code FTN to get a no-sweat bonus up to $100. And today we go to the only person I go to. He's joined us each and every year of the Team Preview Series. So generous with his time. Luke Jones at Baltimore. Luke, Ravens and Orioles reporter. He's loving the Orioles right now for WNST BaltimorePositive.com. Luke, we appreciate a few minutes. Let's not bury the lead. You have a very large and successful running back in your backfield this year. My question is, how much is he going to eat? Derrick Henry, talk to me, please.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. I mean, first and foremost, the backstory here is the Ravens have been the best rushing team in football for officially 3 of the last 5 years, but really the better part of the last 5 years. Really from the moment Lamar Jackson took over for Joe Flacco. I mean, it's been that long, and they've never had issues running the football with a variety of running backs. So you go out and you sign Derrick Henry. You give him not a lucrative long-term contract, but some real money for the short term. And I think the big question is, how much can you expect? I think you look at the reality of where the Ravens have been in recent years. I don't think Lamar Jackson is going to stop running the football. Maybe he runs a little bit less, but you don't want to take away what's been one of your biggest strengths and such a big asset to your rushing attack. But Derrick Henry, I think you can probably expect him to run more than, say, Gus Edwards, who was right around 200 carries last year. But I think so much about the Ravens, Mike, and this is where we branch off from fantasy and look at the big picture. It's about January. It's about this team winning in the postseason and advancing and getting to a Super Bowl after the disappointment of last year and 2019, also the number one seed and not getting to a Super Bowl. So Derrick Henry's going to eat. There's no question about that. But is he going to be a 300 carry back anymore? I have a hard time believing that just based on how the Ravens have typically operated and functioned with their ground game, understanding he's a year older, understanding he has 2,000 carries under his belt in his career. You want to keep him as fresh as possible for the AFC Championship game, for example, where they only had their running backs carry 6 times against the Chiefs last January, but you want him to be fresh to carry 20 or 25 times in that spot. So I think there's going to be a balance here. You need to win games every week, and he's going to be a big part of what they do. But thinking that Derrick Henry's going to rush for 2,000 yards or be a 300 plus carry back at this stage, considering all the other skill players the Ravens have, starting with Lamar Jackson, I'm guessing I'd go with the under there. And, maybe it's in that similar, 250, 260, somewhere like that, where more than Gus Edwards the last couple of years for the Ravens, but certainly not the peak usage that Derrick Henry had in Tennessee.
Well, then as a follow-up to that, I'm a Justice Hill guy. He's very dynamic, super efficient, especially coming out of the backfield. And my other question is Keaton Mitchell. So talk about both of those. When do you think Mitchell's going to be back? Because he came on, did a real great job before getting injured here. So certainly some other options as well that can split the load. But the question is, when is Mitchell back? And Justice Hill, what's the view of him in the backfield?
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see where Justice Hill fits. Again, Derrick Henry's going to carry more, presumably, than Gus Edwards did last year. Justice Hill was an unsung hero for their backfield last year, but is he going to get consistent production? I think that's where it's a little more difficult to project. Keaton Mitchell, I mean, that was one of the understated parts of where the Ravens coming up short in January was not having his home run ability. I mean, just unbelievable what he did, albeit in roughly half a season and pretty limited touches here and there. But this kid was just a home run hitter every time he touched the ball. Unfortunately, I think certainly if you're thinking about it from a fantasy standpoint or from a big picture standpoint for the Ravens, I don't have high expectations. John Harbaugh has already said he's not going to be ready for the start of the season. I mean, this was a mid-December ACL injury. He's progressing. I know as of a few weeks ago, he had begun jogging, and they have kind of the anti-gravity kind of machines and running in the pool, things of that nature. So he's making good progress. But I think realistically, anything you get from him in 2024 is going to be a bonus. I think the ideal scenario that's within the reasonable realm of range of expectations would be maybe he returns around Thanksgiving and can be a really intriguing change of pace for them down the stretch, and certainly in January. So I think certainly there's that leaves some room for Justice Hill to get some carries. I think third down, Derrick Henry really hasn't been a receiver out of the backfield, although Lamar Jackson typically hasn't thrown to receivers or running backs out of the backfield that frequently either. So, I think Justice Hill will fit in. Might be a stretch to think that he's going to match last year's production, but certainly he's a valuable piece for them, whether it's as that change of pace. He's a special teams player as well. They've got, Devin Duvernay, their primary returner, left via free agency. So there's some potential opportunity there. So Justice Hill will still be in the mix, but again, as it pertains to rushing, Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson are going to swallow up most of the opportunity there.
Let's turn to the passing attack. A couple things here. Number one, our Aaron Schatz at FTN again got a ton of criticism as the only one who didn't vote for Lamar Jackson first. He had him second. So we were kind of shocked at the vitriol. He's like, a lot like I had him fifth. I had him second. But Lamar, obviously, two-time MVP, legend, fantastic, wonderful job. Passing attack here. You don't have to sell me on Zay Flowers here, Luke. I'm a BC guy, and I still haven't gotten over the Chargers taking Quentin Johnson over Zay Flowers. But that mistake is your gift. Of course, Mark Andrews back, going to be healthy. Question is the rest here of the receivers and how this looks for this team. Bateman, I've heard good things, but then I've heard he was struggling. Tez Walker, real exciting, explosive wideout from North Carolina. And Isaiah Likely, those are my questions. Is he really going to be a bigger part of the offense? We heard that last year, and then it really didn't come to fruition until Andrews was gone. So talk about the whole wide receiver tight end group here. Really strong for Lamar making a run at a third MVP.
Yeah, and by the way, Aaron, big fan of Aaron. I didn't understand the vitriol either. I think he had a very plausible, reasonable argument, regardless of whether you agree or disagree. It's fun. It's okay to disagree.
He had him second, Luke.
Exactly. And it wasn't this year. I mean, even Lamar in 2019, he had 36 touchdowns. He was sixth in the NFL in rushing. It was a historic statistical season. This was not that. I mean, he set some other career highs. He had a really good season and was worthy of it, but it's not as though I thought he needed to be unanimous. So I had no problem with Aaron voting the way that he did. But I think for this Ravens passing attack, it's a pretty similar question. If you go back to, let's say, 2019, Marquise Brown's rookie year with the Ravens, it's been pretty easy to kind of see how the targets shake out. Lamar's going to throw to Mark Andrews. We know that, and that's warranted. I mean, you're talking about a 3-time Pro Bowl tight end and with all-pro ability and all-pro seasons in the past. And he's going to throw to his top wide receiver. So that played out in 2019. That played out in 2020. I think it was on the way to playing out a year ago with Zay Flowers stepping into that number one wide receiver role, regardless of any acclaim for Odell Beckham Jr. or anyone else in that wide receiver group. But it was very much Mark Andrews and Zay Flowers. The question has always been a number 3 receiving option emerging, whether you're talking about another tight end, whether you're talking about another wide receiver. I think you go back to 2021, that was probably the best that a number 3 pass catching target had done for them. That was Bateman's rookie year, right around 500 receiving yards. So we know this has never been a high volume passing attack with Lamar Jackson at the helm. And I don't think that's going to change. Certainly now when you've added Derrick Henry to the backfield. But I think it is very much a relevant question if this passing game is going to grow. And they made some really impressive steps under Todd Monken last year. But statistically grow from an efficiency standpoint. And again, I'm going to keep coming back to this theme. Thriving in January and getting over the hump, knowing when you're going to go up against the other elite teams in the conference. It is that number 3 option emerging. I think if you look at Rashad Bateman, there's so much to like. This was a guy who was on his way to having a big season a couple years ago before the unfortunate Liz Frank injury, but he's healthy now, and he was healthy for most of last year. But for whatever reason, and I don't think it's a personality thing or anything of that nature, but he and Lamar Jackson have just never found that on-field chemistry that you would like to see now as a guy is going into his 4th season. And even this spring watching them, it didn't really seem like there had been a breakthrough. Now, it's OTAs. It's mandatory minicamp. No one cares about that come September. But that's where I think that's going to be a big question mark as far as what that looks like over the summer and certainly what it looks like in the regular season. Tez Walker, you mentioned, I think he's a really interesting wild card from a deep ball standpoint. Can I sit here with any level of confidence or conviction saying he's going to be a big part of what they do volume wise? Probably not. Could he make some big plays here and there in the way that a Devin Duvernay did at different times the last few years for the Ravens? Sure, but it's tough for me to envision much more than that. But the guy you mentioned, and I think this is where it's so fascinating, Isaiah Likely. We saw him do good things filling in for Mark Andrews his rookie year when Mark Andrews missed a couple games. And certainly we saw it down the stretch last year when he was out with the serious ankle injury. Isaiah Likely was arguably their top target over the last 5 games, even over Zay Flowers, who was certainly big and productive in what he was doing. But there has been more and more of a thought, more and more of a sentiment of maybe the Ravens exploring some more 12 personnel, 2 tight ends on the field. I think it is a little easier said than done from the standpoint of both Andrews and Likely are more of that slot tight end. They're not really inline guys in the way that you thought of Gronkowski and Aaron Hernandez, off-field issues aside, a decade ago and a decade plus ago in New England. So I think that's the intriguing thought, though, because Lamar has always been a guy who loves throwing to the tight ends and one wide receiver. So can it be a little bit more of Isaiah Likely joining Mark Andrews and Zay Flowers? If it is, that's where I'm not sure you're going to see a big step forward from Rashad Bateman or anyone else. So, but I think that's a really intriguing possibility because I think anyone who watched it last year saw Isaiah Likely's playmaking ability and said, how can you get him and Mark Andrews on the field together? Can really stress a defense. I mean, how do you play in terms of size matchups, speed, with Derrick Henry in the backfield and wanting to have enough size there, but do you have linebackers that can hang with Andrews and Likely in coverage? I mean, I think it just creates all kinds of matchup nightmares, but you've got to have the spacing, the route concepts, all those different factors in place. And I think lots of teams have talked about having 2 tight ends and using them and deploying them at the same time. And I think in recent history, you'd probably see that maybe the substance isn't there, that it comes to fruition as much as teams talk about it. So I think that's a very distinct possibility. But again, the overarching theme here, I think, is going to be Zay Flowers and Mark Andrews are going to continue to get big targets. I don't think anyone doubts that. But is there a more consistent third option that emerges that if that does happen, I feel like this offense becomes closer and closer to being unstoppable.
Luke, great stuff as always. That was tremendous insight. Last question, then we will get you out of here. Ravens coaching staff, a lot of turnover, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Interesting side note here, Luke. Chris Hewitt and I have a very long history. We both were top 100-meter runners here in New Jersey. I beat him going into the county championship, and he edged me out for the county title in the 100 meters. So I know how great Chris Hewitt is as an athlete. He's now doing a great job as a coach, and he's stepping up to a bigger role now because, of course, Mike McDonald over in Seattle, Denard Wilson, Anthony Weaver left for positions elsewhere. So I think best question I can end with here, defense. How do you think it's going to be? Because the Ravens have a difficult schedule, which I know everybody talks about, but you're in a division where everyone has a challenging schedule. Per Vegas projected win totals, Steelers are the hardest, Browns are the 3rd hardest, Ravens are the 4th hardest here. So offense, great. Lamar, incredible. Certainly know that. My question is the defense with the turnover in the coaching staff. How do you think it's going to be here heading into 2024 as the Ravens are trying to get another Super Bowl championship?
I mean, you just said it. I mean, there's a lot of challenge there in terms of the transition from coaching, going from Mike McDonald to Zach Orr, their new defensive coordinator. As you mentioned, Chris Hewitt, who's been coaching their secondary for a very long time, they're going to lean on his experience more heavily because of some of the other assistants, as you mentioned. But it's also, they lost a lot of depth. I mean, Jadeveon Clowney's in Carolina now, who was their best edge guy by a wide margin last year. Geno Stone, who led the AFC in interceptions, albeit he was their number 3 safety, but the Ravens love to use 3 safeties and so they can move Kyle Hamilton all over the field. I have no idea who their 3rd safety is going to be right now, Mike. I think there's a good chance it's someone that's not on the roster right now. As you know, there are some free agent veteran safety options out there that it's been a cooler market than normal. So I still think this is going to be a really good defense. And the reason why is they have an elite player at every level. When you talk about Justin Madubuike, their stud defensive tackle, who they gave basically a $100 million contract to re-sign this offseason. Roquan Smith, who right there, you know, with Warner in San Francisco is the best linebacker, best off-ball linebacker in the NFL. And as I mentioned, Kyle Hamilton, who is just becoming one of the very best players in the NFL, offense or defense. That's how talented that kid is. And you still have other Pro Bowl caliber players like Marlon Humphrey with that defense. So I don't think there's going to be this dramatic drop off, but you're talking about the top scoring defense that led the NFL in sacks and was tied for first in takeaways last year. Do I think they're going to duplicate that? Well, even if Mike Macdonald and all those other names I mentioned were coming back, probably not. But I think the good thing here is Zach Orr, despite the fact that he's a first-time defensive coordinator and there are some questions about calling plays in the same way there was with Mike Macdonald a couple years ago, and the Ravens got off to a choppy start 2 years ago before their defense really found their footing. I think there'll be some growing pains. I do think their depth is going to be tested a little bit more, especially at safety, at outside linebacker. As I mentioned, they did re-sign Kyle Van Noy, but Jadeveon Clowney's gone. They've got a very young group there, Odafe Owe, and a bunch of question marks after that. So I think there's still upside. I think this is still going to be a very good defense. Is it going to be at the same elite level as last year? However, I think the coaching and some of the depth hits that they took, I think it would be tough to expect that. But Mike, this is a Ravens defense, and for the better part of 25 years, this is a group that you count on to be usually a top 5 caliber defense and usually no worse than a top 10 caliber defense. And even with some of the questions I mentioned, I fully expect them to remain within that range in 2024.
Yeah, so do I, and I'm sure they'll be ready to go on Thursday, September 5th at Kansas City, 8:20 p.m. You know who's always ready to go? Luke Jones on X at Baltimore Luke, Ravens-Orioles reporter, WNST, BaltimorePositive.com. Luke, you never disappoint. Great nuggets as always. Can't wait for the season to get started. Would love to connect as we get closer to August. July 4th's coming. Put some hot dogs on the grill, but let's start looking to training camp here. Things are going to get rolling real soon. We appreciate a few minutes.
No problem, Mike. Glad to do it.
The NFL Team Preview Series is sponsored by Boom Fantasy, your top choice for daily fantasy sports action. Boom Fantasy has the most innovative games that cater to both casual and hardcore fans. Win up to 500 times your entry only at Boom Fantasy. Download now on the App Store and Google Play. Use promo code FTN to get a no-sweat bonus up to $100.